Hello and welcome to the Dark Bestiary. My name is Fen and I am your natural historian for this series, where we take our deep dive into all of the monsters. It's the other half of the And You series. We looked at all the gear and the settlement related stuff in that, and in the Dark Bestiary we're going to take our dive into the monsters, looking at their lore, their hunt phase cards, their showdown cards, resources, all of that jazz. Everything to do with what happens when you depart the settlement and return, that is the domain of the Dark Bestiary. This first video is going to be the show your work video. In the future, I'm going to be skipping a lot of this process and I'm just going to be showing everything laid out and talking about it directly. But here, this is the video where I'm going to talk about the process, how I got to it, why I used that particular process, and also at the end of it we're going to analyse a little bit of the Prologue White Lion Showdown fight, just to provide a bit of an example. And also this is kind of the only place where I can really talk about it. Otherwise I'd have to bundle it in with the White Lion, and the truth is that the Prologue White Lion is not quite the same beast as any other White Lion. It's pseudo-legendary in kind of a way. We'll get into that later, but I wanted to peel these apart, but also give you some kind of analysis in this video. What you can see here, this is pretty much everything I will use while analysing a monster. Some of these are just here for kind of visual reference. I don't really need to have the hunt phase board out when I'm doing it by myself, but it's nice to have it here and just talk about the hunt phase in general, just to highlight a couple of things. Likewise, I don't really need the dashboard out, but it does help highlight here for the purposes of the video that the dashboard is where the monster is. This pawn, this is the representation of where the monster is on the board, but the dashboard is where the monster's actually hanging out, providing all those lovely threats. So, let's start with my process, shall we? The very first thing I do when dealing with a new monster is I play it blind. I really value the blind experience, and one of my biggest recommendations to anyone is always, hey, play the game a bit blind first, and whenever you face a new monster, you don't get that experience again. That's the biggest thing I want to stress here, is I take that blind experience and I do the best I can to protect it. I'm quite often very late in getting the new monster content physically by post. It just seems to work out that way, and I spend my time before it arrives burying my head in the sand, just ignoring everything to do with it until I can have that first blind experience. So that's my biggest thing here is don't come into this series if you don't want to be spoiled, and my recommendation would always be don't get spoiled. Play for a bit, but also once you've started to get familiar with the monster, it's absolutely always great to see what other people are doing. Humanity succeeded so much because of language, because we can write things down and even now record things and talk to you from across the void of time. You know, here I am in my present, which will be your past, talking about things I did in my past and breaking things down in my present for you in the future. Also, if somebody ever tries to tell you that looking at this kind of stuff or be engaging in this kind of analysis is like not playing the game, they need to stop trying to stick flies in your breakfast. Get lost. Don't yuck other people's yum. If you're coming in to this series and you've not even fought the monsters and you're like, hey, I don't care, I want the spoiler experience, good for you, yeah? Enjoy the games in how you want to enjoy them. Seriously, why are we playing games if not to have fun? Hopefully. Sometimes maybe you're not having fun, but at least you're engaged. So that's my very first starting experience, is just going in. But I will play slow. I will read everything. I can't take everything in at that moment, but I will read everything that's available to me. I will look at the Showdown page and pay attention to all the information that is there, which does include the high level monsters. And that's something I would recommend to anyone, is this information here, as you can see on this Showdown page. I'm turning my head to look at it. I could rotate this, I'm not going to. Anyway, so this Showdown page here, this is public information. The first time you fight a monster, you get to see how it's like at all levels. And if nothing else, you should try and pay attention to the toughness levels, because that's quite important in letting you take a good guess at when you're going to do reasonably well against high level monsters. I've talked about this with the weapons, but effectively you want to try and wound a monster around 60% of the time. If you're doing strength based, you can get away with 30 to 40% of the time if that's all going to be critical wounds. But again, that's all subjective based on how good your gear is, what kind of monster you're fighting, etc, etc. Like, running in with a ton of luck is not going to be very effective if you're up against the butcher, who barely has any locations that can be critically wounded. I don't think there should be any taboo in looking at this. Everything on this page is public information from the very moment that you face the monster for the first time. It's derived information. Try and memorise it if you want, take some notes if you want, who knows. But anyway, once I've fought the monster a bunch, and it can take a lot of time in the case of Nemesis monsters, because like Core Nemesis and Final Nemesis, you only get to face those each once per campaign. And especially if you're experimenting with weird stuff, sometimes it just doesn't work and you're like left, oh, I can't really get to the end of this campaign now because I've kind of been trying this weird thing and it's not worked out. So I can only face them once per campaign each. And the normal Nemesis monsters, to face them at all the different levels, usually the level 3 versions are buried quite late in the timeline. So it takes a long time and a lot of reps for me to get there. But even once I've finished that and I've fought the monster a bunch and I'm feeling like reasonably confident in understanding it, that is the point where I'm like, okay, now I can start doing my like detailed analysis, which I do for the writing. And the very first thing I do in that is lore related. So I'll go through these bits of lore, including any which are located elsewhere. Some of which are on hunt cards. The stuff that's in the Showdown, like how the monster behaves through its active behaviours in its AI deck and its reactive behaviours in its hit location deck. All of these, and even the resources, they give you a flavour of what the monster is like. This is quite important, I think, for at least from my perspective of Kingdom Death, because Kingdom Death is kind of a top-down designed game. And so I try to approach my analysis of monsters from the same direction. For those of you who are not familiar with the terms, when designing games, and in fact designing a lot of things, you can have two approaches. You can have a top-down approach or a bottom-up approach. So a top-down approach is like looking at the whole of the thing first. You have an idea. I want to do a story in a world which is upside down. Yeah, that could be like the first concept you have, and then as you start building the pieces together, you're thinking about, okay, well, what's going to be like if everybody is upside down? What's happening with gravity? What's the rules and laws? Do people even like realize this? How am I going to make it clear that everyone is upside down? So that kind of thing, you're moving towards the fine details and the like nitty-gritty mechanics of the world near the bottom. It's the same with board games. You can have a top-down approach of, I want to write a Arkham Horror scenario that takes place in a restaurant. Okay? Or you can come bottom up, and bottom up is where you have the mechanics first and you're looking to fit those into something. To get back to Arkham Horror, that could be, oh, I've got this idea of this really neat mechanic where players have to set their hand aside and play blind from it. How can I make that part of a scenario? And you build up from the mechanics. Another example would be coming up with a game that's like, I've got a neat idea for making a platformer as a board game where you have sliding tiles around a board that move and following like a certain deck that makes moving in random patterns, and you have to like figure out your jumps in advance using a deck of cards of programming. Yeah, like mechanics first. You have no idea what the world's going to be like, and at the top of it you'll paint everything over that. I think for a good example of a bottom-up designer, Rainer Knizia is very, very good at that. He's definitely mechanics focused first. Some of his games are so, like the theming is so irrelevant that it could just be an abstract game, it wouldn't matter. In contrast to that, Adam strikes me from both his designs and also like the correspondence I've had with him and what I've seen in various different interviews and everything, and written interviews also. He seems to come from a top-down approach. So that's how I look at it, and it's really helpful to consider not just what the lore is telling you, but also what the real world like analogues are. Sometimes Kingdom Death monsters are inspired by members of the natural world, the animal kingdom. Sometimes they're inspired by pop culture things, or like particularly anime related stuff. Sometimes this is conscious, sometimes this isn't. A really lovely story Adam told me recently, like this year, I wrote to him just about how much I really enjoyed the Killennium Butcher. And I loved the fact that all four of the characters and the whole scenario comes together as kind of a Wizard of Oz thing. And he was like, I didn't realise that until Anna was doing the polishing work on it and told him, like, well, this is a Wizard of Oz inspired thing. And he was like, oh, crikey, he hadn't thought of that. And suddenly he was like, oh, it is. I was doing that. I didn't realise. And that's kind of delightful and fun. And it's very much why I do feel there's a top-down sort of approach. So I will be looking at the lore-related stuff and also the other little bits and pieces that link into the natural world. Now I'll take a dive into the White Lions in particular in the chapter 1 in the video that follows this one. I'm not going to go into detail here, but they're a really fascinating part of the game, and I think it's quite important to note that the intended first monster that anyone fights is a white lion. And there's actually meaning to that, and there's weight to that, beyond it just being a very good introductory monster. So that's the first two steps of my analysis. Is I look at the lore, the world building, and then try and find out the references, things that it relates to, either from the real world, from other games, from other bits of media. And it helps inform kind of an understanding of what the creature is within the world, and that does influence how these creatures behave. So, enough waffle on all of that. The next step will be the hunt phase. So, two things I look at with the hunt phase. The first one is this here. We all know how this works. You've got the E's, they represent the monster-specific events, and then the blank spaces, including if the monster isn't at these particular levels, are random hunt event cards. The numbers are where the particular level monster you'll be facing is. One of the very first things to always pay attention to is this ratio. Hunting the level 1 white lion, we've got 2 white lion events, 1 random hunt event. That means this is quite a heavily white lion orientated hunt. And because there's always less of these monster-specific hunt events, they're always more predictable than the basic hunt events, which could be, the card could represent some promo card or some encounter, or it could be any one of 100 different basic hunt events from the table, or heck, in the future it might even be wider than that, especially if the team decide to introduce like decks where you can customize the part of the world you're in. There's always this case of flavour of how much is the ratio. So we've got 3-1 here. When we move to the level 2, we suddenly got, 2-1. Then at level 2 we got 3 and 2 plus Overwhelming Darkness. And then at the level 3 we've got 5 along with 1, 2, 3, 4 basic hunt events. Now the White Lion's actually unusual in that it is a 5 monster hunt event card monster. If we just turn back here, the Screaming Antelope's 4. The Phoenix is 4, So that actually means that the White Lion hunts are just a bit more predictable than hunting the other 2 monsters in the core game, which is in itself quite interesting. Not just from a mechanical standpoint, but also again from a lore standpoint. It suggests that the White Lions are quite sort of territorial. They stay in kind of one place more, so you're more likely to encounter things involving them when you're hunting them because they don't rove around as widely. There's more of a trail to follow. So that's always really interesting. Also paying attention to how far you have to go and what's past Overwhelming Darkness. One of the really useful things is when the monster isn't immediately on this spot and it's here instead, that gives you an opportunity here to do herb gathering and replenish survival that may have been lost here. So it's really nice to have the level 2 here, but if it's tight up against this, there's nothing really you can do about that, so you'll want to plan accordingly, and you may well be going into the showdown with no survival. You know, c'est la vie, such it is. As for the rest of the hunt events, the monster ones, I have a little bit of a system for that. Okay, so I like to use an imaginary, let's get off that, an imaginary business chart. So a business chart is a graph with a X and a Y axis that forms like a cross. So you've got positive and negatives on both of the X and Y axis. And then for myself, I consider top is positive and bottom here is negative. So it's top, you know, nice little gradient. Really positive, really negative, quite harmful. And then we've got very fixed on the left and very random on the right. You know, random, R for right, R for random. And then I'll just organise the cards on that imaginary business chart, not being incredibly granular about it. Usually I have 6 piles. The reason is there's generally 8 monster cards. So if we very quickly do this, I'm not going to explain why I'm putting them in the various places, but let's have a quick look. So we got marked territory, okay, fixed, beneficial. Now, yeah, sure, you can do a random hunt event, but it always does a random hunt event, so I consider that to be fixed. So we're going to put it in the top left corner. Fixed, positive. Okay, lion sculpture, fixed, again, positive, definitely. That's always a net gain. Aromatic breeze, so this is fixed, has the monster move forwards. It can ambush them. So for me, the monster moving forwards is a positive because it shortens the length of the hunt, but if it does catch you, it's a bit of a negative. So I think this is overall a kind of neutral card for me. I don't think it's negative. It's definitely fixed though, so we'll put it here. So that's positive. Neutral fixed. Yeah, neutral fixed. Then here, White Line Club, definitely positive, but this is random. So it's going over here on this side in the top right corner. Yet there can be bad things that happen from this, but you're always getting these random basic resources, so it's definitely a positive for me. Although it's random the outcome. This here. Okay, so either we're rolling twice on the basic hunt event, that gives us some control, or we're gaining a courage and we roll on this table. So for me, that is definitely, while the table has some bad stuff on it, it's your choice to roll on there, and you are getting courage for doing it. So I think this is positive, and it's random though. So, you know, it's positive random, but we do have some control and decision over it. So I could see an argument for putting it like maybe more in the middle. So we'll just do that. Scratching grounds. Okay, +1 courage. Roll your on this. Can get positive stuff. Random. Positive. Yeah, definite. Prowling lion. Okay. White lion moves away. That's bad. Ground fighting. That's bad. Boom. So this is fixed and negative. Just, yeah. And then last of all, lion in heat. Definitely fixed. Definitely negative. So we'll put that there, the fixed negative. So as you can see, this is just like my assessment of it. If we have a look through here now, I think personally that on the whole, the White Lion trends towards being negative. We've got like more negative, trends to be positive. We've got more positives in here, and tends to be more fixed and predictable than random. So that's just my personal breakdown of it. I'll do this fully and properly with a discussion of why in the White Lion video next time. But at least now you can make your own assessment of any monster, and it's easy to hold in your head and be like, okay, how predictable, how random is it? And also it's worth paying attention to like opportunities. So for example, the White Lion Cub, this means White Lions can generate a lot more resources than normal. That's quite helpful. But also a big one is marked territory. Like once you've got 3+ understanding, hunting White Lions can give you free ammonia. Ammonia is a vitally important innovation, and getting it for free, getting any innovation for free is always a nice benefit. So that's a kind of what I call peaks, which is big opportunities to get a positive. And then like troughs is like where things are kind of not so great, and there are opportunities for bad stuff to happen. They occur more with the monster. So that's how I analyse the hunt phase, how I'll be doing it going ahead. Okay, then when we arrive at the showdown, I'm looking at the showdown setup. So a few things I want to be paying attention to. First of all is the deployment. So is it the diamond deployment, is it the short edge deployment, or the long edge deployment? So that's the three most common types of deployment. We do see others. The Smog Singers have a very unusual version of deployment, but most of the time it's diamond for quarries, and we tend to get long edge for nemesis monsters, at least in the core game. So benefits of each. The diamond is nice if you've got survivors who are maybe independent and want to be away from the fighting. Perhaps they're running full support, or they are playing an archer and they want to be on the wing. Otherwise, you tend to cluster in one area. My preference on a diamond is to deploy everyone sort of down to the bottom, because I'll be sat here. But if I'm playing with other people, we might fight around here. The advantage of fighting on the long edge is it's harder to get caught at the edges. Advantage of fighting the short edge is you get thrown back less distance because you'll bounce against the side of the board. So that's the first thing to think about. Next thing is our terrain. So things we're looking at is what's the fixed terrain we get in the showdown, and how much do we get in the way of random terrain. So fixed terrain does two things. It tells you a story, in this case tall grass found around white lions, and it also provides sometimes specific combat mechanics. In the case of the tall grass, which is present for the white lion and the gorm, this helps make our early showdowns a little easier because we've got access to a couple of 2x2 tiles that give us extra evasion and even can let us hide in them to avoid being targeted if required. So it helps make the showdown a little easier. Random terrain offers opportunities. We don't know what we're going to get. Terrain tends to be positive for the survivors, not always. Sometimes it can have some very scary connotations, so you just need to be careful about that. But otherwise, it's nice. My least favourite showdowns generally tend to be ones with zero random terrain, because it can just kind of feel a bit rote. It's okay, but as a quarry monster in particular, it isn't the most fun thing, because you learn what to do with the terrain and then you're just doing that all of the time. An example would be the Sunstalker, where it's fixed set of pillars, which you use the pillars to hide from the supernovas. And there's some salt pillars at the far end, which you really want to go and break because salt's an important resource. So it kind of creates this same pattern each time, and there's no extra terrain to wrinkle things anymore, so it's down to the monster to provide the variety. On the rest of this, I worry less about the victory and defeat conditions, but I will pay attention to the defeat conditions whether I win or lose, because sometimes there's things like this, which losing jewellery half the time, you kind of need to make sure you have a piece of jewellery that's disposable. Some very, very good items are jewellery, and losing them can be quite a cost. Also on rewards, we'll talk more about that when I discuss the resource section, but it's nice to pay attention to these kind of things that tell you if there's an extra benefit for a particular innovation when defeating level 3, so that you want to keep your eye out for that kind of stuff. The other thing to always pay attention to is the instinct. The main question you should be asking yourself is, what's the instinct doing? Is it, like Sniff, providing the monster more opportunities to attack the survivors by increasing the number of potential targets? Or is it directly punishing the survivors for not providing a target? Or is it just kind of maybe doing some other default ability? The Screaming Antelope, for example, runs off to eat Acanthus, or if there's no Acanthus around, it just runs and runs and runs and runs. So that's kind of thing we want to be thinking about with regards to the instinct. There's plenty more. Paying attention to all of these stats, for example, quite relevant. the monster in particular, I mentioned about the higher level monsters, and just pay attention to these toughness breaks so you can understand whether you're sort of ready to upgrade to another monster or not. There's always additional wrinkles and things to consider, but toughness is a big factor. Strength versus toughness determines a lot of how much control you have over Showdown. But when it comes to individual levels, this is something you want to be paying attention to. So first of all, the total number of cards plus 1, that usually gives us how many wounds the monster can take. So we can generally make a quick approximation of how long it's going to take to get through a Showdown. You know, for example, this here, 11 wounds. So we need to score 11 wounds. If we're wounding half the time, then we need to score 22 hits. If we're hitting half the time, then we need to roll 44 attack dice. And how many survives do we have? 4. Okay, so we get to roll 4, 4 survivors get to go, 2 dice each. You can kind of break it down and figure out roughly how many rounds a Showdown might go for on average. It never works out that way. There's a lot of variance in the game, but it can give you an idea how durable a monster is. But also, quite importantly, is these ratios here. So, by natural design, advanced cards are more dangerous than basic cards, and legendary cards are way more dangerous than advanced and basic cards. And a big thing when playing is, especially against the level 3s, removing those super dangerous cards as wounds can make a massive difference between a Showdown being manageable or not. That's one of the reasons having the life trait on a monster is so dangerous, because the monster's AI deck is protected. You can't stop it doing those moves by removing them. It's going to get to do them. Tough luck. The only thing you might be able to influence is what order those happen in and who the targets are. So that's a big thing to think about. Does the monster have life? Usually these kind of monsters, the generic ones don't, but the legendaries do. You will occasionally find, however, nemesis monsters that use them because they have very small fixed decks. So that's always something to pay attention to. It's like, can I craft the monster's behaviour? Can I prune it? Can I eliminate dangerous cards or not? Obviously against the White Lion, you can. Fantastic. Okay, so that's the Showdown there. Let's get on to our dashboard, shall we? So we've considered how the setup is. We've considered the mix of the game and all of that. So the next thing I'll be doing in my analysis is I'll be looking through the AI cards, and I tend to categorize them by primary target. So what do they go for first? Let's just grab this so we can show you. Let's zoom in. Yeah, so what do they go for first? Their top priority target, closest threat, in facing, in range, and I will put all of the cards with that kind of targeting together under their own sort of move and attack pile. Any intimidates, I'll put those in their own pile. Any moods and traits, I'll put those together. And then there's a last pile which I hate having, but you've got to. It's kind of like a catch-all, miscellaneous, everything else. Because sometimes monsters have cards that aren't traits, but they just do something. And it's not really an attack, it's not really intimidate. So you just need to kind of have that caught there. And the main thing you're looking for with these is to get a good idea of what the monster generally targets with. So for example, the White Lion, closest threat facing in range is a very common targeting, meaning that if you put someone in the front facing and they're the closest target, you can be fairly confident the monster's going to target them. But White Lion's a great example because occasionally that changes. The White Lion likes to super punish survivors who are knocked down with a few cards where it'll just ignore any other target and go straight for the one who's knocked down and really badly hurt them. So that's the other thing you'll be thinking about with regards to the monster's like most threatening moments, where the monster peaks in power. Likewise, knowing what the monster's general intimidate targets are can be fairly helpful. Some monsters intimidate a lot more than others. Some monsters intimidate everyone at once, some or do like just one specific survivor, or they mix it up. And knowing how the monster behaves as it intimidates, and whether those intimidates scale or if they automatically work or maybe they don't work like some of the time, or if there's extra things baked into them like knockback, that's all stuff you do want to consider as well, because it has an impact on your positioning. And as I've talked about in some of the other series, being isolated by the monster, so the monster pushes you back and pursues you and ends up being between you and everyone else, and you're quite a distance away from the others, that's a dangerous situation, because the monster's designed to fight 4 versus 1. Well, 1v4. Survivors aren't. Survivors are meant to be part of the 4v1. So anytime the monster gets to isolate you, that's dangerous, that's scary. Right, let's pop that back for now. Then we have hit locations. So with the hit locations, I will categorize them in a few different ways. We've got Strange Hand on top because this is the prologue fight. But first of all, I will put a pile of all of the cards that just do something. So if they always do something, they're going in one pile. Impervious would be an example of that. Impervious is like a piece of text that just says this hit location can't be wounded. So, or it might be like this hit location has +2 toughness or -2 toughness or whatever. It's a modifier that's always there. The next thing I'll do is I'll organise by the reaction types. So you have wound, reflex and failure. In order of how dangerous they are, reflexes are the most dangerous because they always trigger unless you get a critical wound. Then failures are the next most dangerous because if you fail to wound, they're going to punish you. And then wounds are the least because if you succeed at wounding, at least you get to hurt the monster as well as it hurting you, which is an okay trade-off. You might prioritise them a little differently. Sometimes I would think it's perfectly fine if you feel that wounds are more dangerous than failures. But either way, I'll break them apart into the 3 different piles. And then of course there's the trap, or sometimes traps, that go off on their own thing. And the key things to consider with a trap card is, first of all, how many cards are in the hit location deck total. Because once you know that, you can pay attention to how many are in the discard pile, and you can think about the shifting odds. Nobody wants to break out a hypogeometric calculator to work out constantly the odds of them hitting the trap each time they draw a card from an attack. That's not fun, for me at least. Maybe it's fun for you, but it would still slow down your play and take a lot of time. But having a good idea, roughly, like, okay, well, at the start of the showdown, there's 10 cards and one of them's a trap. Okay, so first card drawn, 10% chance. Get down to 5 cards left, the trap's in there, now it's a 20% chance of drawing the trap off 1 card. So those are the kind of things you sort of want to be thinking about, and you're like, okay, well, this is getting more and more likely that we're going to hit the trap. Do I want to throw my best, my most uninjured survivors first? Or do I want to get the ones in who might be able to squeak in a couple more points of damage and then have somebody near the end of the round take the trap? So knowing how many cards are in the deck, so you can always be thinking about, okay, well, how many have we drawn? How many's left? Odds of hitting the trap from this position. Even if it's just a gut feeling, that can be super helpful. It's always something to consider. You can easily look at the 2 piles and be like, well, the discard pile seems pretty high, so I guess the trap's coming soon. Sometimes, though, it's on the bottom. Yeah. Then when it comes to critical wounds, I don't categorise by critical wounds, but I will have a look at them. I'll pay attention to them, especially persistent injuries, because they'll provide extra benefits. And sometimes there's really interesting and powerful things that can occur with critical wounds. This one, for example, gives you an opportunity to trade a point of survival for permanent strength along with a persistent injury. Sometimes critical wounds generate resources, and that's super helpful and links in with the resource deck. The other thing I will consider is any traits, any cards that start in play, and any token modifiers. These are all quite important to think about, as is the basic action. I really should have talked about this first, but the basic action is this thing that you want to consider comparing everything to. For example, with the White Lion, you'll see that in essence, the basic action and Claw are kind of almost the same thing. Not quite. The basic action actually has better targeting, because it just goes for closest survivor and field of view. Claw is a little more directed, but otherwise they have the same flow step and they have the same dice involved. So basic actions can often give you a good idea of what to expect from the monster. Oh, I clicked on the dice, excuse me. So last of all, once you've beaten the monster, you want to be thinking about a few things. First of all, experience to hit point, hunt XP to weapon proficiency ratios. I'm in the wrong place for that. So a lot of the monsters have a pattern like this where they'll give you 1 hunt XP and weapon proficiency level and the rewards for beating the level 1, and they'll give you 2 for the level 2+. This means that your weapon proficiency speed kind of slows down for each survivor, but it's not always the case. Nemesis monsters often just have a fixed amount further across the board, and some monsters, like I believe the Phoenix, the Phoenix gives you a choice and does even more weapon proficiency levels. So this is something to pay attention to. Like, the Phoenix is genuinely quite good at level 3 for grinding your weapon proficiency, as long as you've got a good handle on the fight. So stuff like that can be very helpful to know, especially when it's unusual. But also we have our resources. So the things to think about is the makeup of the deck. I will organise these decks into the different piles, which, bone, hide, organ, multiples. Sometimes resources cover multiple different types, and of course scrap and perfects and things like that you want to pay attention to. Then you have strange resources such as the Elder Cat Teeth for killing the level 3 White Lion. This is just a flat extra bonus, and the question tends to be, is it good enough that you care about this for specifically crafting the gear that can be made from it, or is it like the Elder Cat Teeth? Who cares about the Cat Fang dagger outside of when you've got access to seed patterns? It's a terrible dagger, but this is an extra bone. And the new wrinkle we got, which is super cool, is the indomitable resources. And the thing you want to be thinking about always there is, okay, well, how many different types do I get in the deck? So what's the odds of getting a given one? Do I need multiples? What have I got? Oh, okay, so I've got this. And if you got the Roaring Harmonica crafted, any more of these is just a perfect bone, because you can only craft one of them. So this adds a whole extra wrinkle to fighting the level 3 indomitable versions, which I think is super interesting. I'll discuss these where we have them. We don't have all of them at the moment on the simulator, so I really can't cover every single one. So be it. So yeah, that is how I tend to organise and break things down. And to summarise it, I'll start each of these videos by going through the lore, then the hunt phase, then the showdown setup, then the dashboard, specifically basic action and statics, then the AI deck, then the hit location deck, and then rewards and resources. And I'll end it usually with kind of a few key points, things which are fairly easy to remember, to just sort of keep in mind, like what kind of target does the monster often go for, and what are the unusual situations that can be very scary, like I mentioned the White Lion knockdown situation there. So before we finish, let's do a very, very quick analysis breakdown of the Prologue White Lion. So I'm just going to flip to the page first. Right, so on the lore front, you just have the introductory story, really well put together. I'm not going to read it here, but that's kind of it. And then on setup, we can see first of all the showdown, we have the diamond setup, and our distance is 6 from the monster. So we're probably going to locate all of our survivors roughly within one area, depending on what suits the number of players. And we also have a specifically set up deck that not only has always these given cards in it, but Claw is always on top. Likewise with the hit location deck, it's all randomized, but the strange hand is always on top. The monster has its basic action monster reference card and no additional traits. and there's no extra terrain. So that's all of the things to consider there. It's very straightforward, as to be expected for an introductory fight. Now, one of the key things about this is because there's such a fixed deck, and because the monster is pretty predictable in its behaviour, especially in its reactions, and because there's just not much to vary this at all, you do end up with two different routes of like how you're going to play this showdown. And just because you've picked one of them doesn't mean you're excluded from picking the other, because while weaving through the showdown, you may change your direction to decide which way you want to go. I'll talk about both different routes after we do the analysis, when I get to the end breakdown bit. But there's no really true 100% you must play it this way. Things are going to change. Even though there's like the same cards in the deck, wounds are going to remove some of them, and the order is going to be randomized. So there's a constant case of the prologue line being different each time, even if it's only by small amounts. So let's get on to the AI deck, shall we? So if we put it down here, we have Claw on top. Okay, closest threat facing range, 2 speed, 2 plus accuracy, 1 damage a pop. Right, okay, so we know that this, on average, typically, is going to hit a survivor in 2 different hit locations for 1 damage apiece. That's like the most likely results out of this, because it hits 90% of the time and has 2 speed. Okay, so survivor has 9 soak, 10 because we have a cloth around her waist. Outside of headshots, this isn't too bad, but this is our baselines we're comparing everything else to. So if we just put this here within our attack pile, and we'll put stuff above it if it's more dangerous and below it if it's less dangerous. Okay, so power SWAT. Right, closest threat facing in range, same targeting, lower speed of 1, but higher damage. So this is it's unlikely you'll take a double head hit, which would result in a severe injury to the head and possible death. This is more likely to do that. Plus this knockback 6, we don't have dash, we only have 5 movement. This could isolate us quite badly, so this is definitely more dangerous than Claw, so I'd put it in the above pile and consider this to be a bit of a peak. This is something I do need to be aware of. Power SWAT does result in a survivor who might have to be rescued, and also standing survivors directly behind each other, probably not the best idea, because I don't have encourage at this point. We only have dodge. We've got 1 survival for a dodge. Okay, Chomp. Right, closest threat facing in range, sure. Closest threat field of view, sure. It's 1 speed. Okay, so we can dodge that. That's nice. It always goes for head. The no jaw is irrelevant, really. It's not irrelevant, but it's very unlikely we're going to trigger the no jaw. So I kind of think Chomp is about on par with Claw, so we're going to put it in that pile. If I was being really granular, it'd probably be a little bit above. But yeah, so Chomp could become a trough. It could become a very beneficial moment for us, but only if we've managed to get the no jaw persistent injury. So most of the time I consider it to be neutral. Right, size up. Okay, so this is a single target. That's not too bad. 4+, so it only works 70% of the time, and it's only 1 brain damage and a knockdown. Okay, so I'm going to put that in kind of the baseline. I think it's about on par with Chomp and Bite. Intimidates are, of course, always a bit different, though, because they're damaging an entirely different resource. So, yeah, we'll put it there. Right. Terrifying Roar. Oh, great. I was happy to get this right afterwards. So, Terrifying Roar is getting all survivors. It's working on a 2+, as long as it's also higher than the target's courage. And most of these survivors are going to have 0 courage. It's very rare they'll have higher than that. They suffer 1 brain damage per monster level and knockback 6. And on top of that, it basic actions the furthest survivor in range. So this card is going to probably give everyone brain damage, knock everyone back 6, and then the white lion is going to go after somebody and isolate them, putting itself between that survivor and everyone else who's also been pushed back. So unless all the survivors got pushed back in the same direction because they were, say, in the facing, that could be really bad. Somebody's getting isolated. So I think this is a very scary card, and can make the showdown quite difficult, because one survivor might be on their own for at least 1, maybe even 2 turns, and that's bad. Then we have Enraged. Okay, a mood, its own pile. When it comes to play, we draw an AI card. That's pretty standard. Moods that don't do that tend to either be really more dangerous, because they're doing something anyway that's very scary, or just softer. If you want to pay attention to a mood drawing an AI card, because effectively the monster's getting to do 2 things. Enraged is giving the monster +1 damage token, and it stays until a survivor is dismembered or killed. Now, the benefit of moods is, effectively, once they're in play, that's 1 less wound you need to deal to the monster for as long as the mood is in play. It's kind of wounded itself, but it's traded that durability for a benefit. Sometimes that benefit is terrifying. Enraged is terrifying. +1 damage, that is most of the attacks the white lion's doing get doubled. You know, even something like Power Swat is now 50% more dangerous, like 50% more damage. That's like cutting through any location apart from the waist straight to a severe injury. So this is a terrifying card to deal with. If the monster gets this early and we don't have really any control about it, if it happens, we're in a bad place. And we're going to have to push our aggression as hard as possible. And then we got Grasp. Okay, so Grasp is a little unusual on the attack front, because we can see it targets, first of all, closest knockdown survivor in range. Now, the white lion often knocks down survivors with its reactions if they stood directly in front of it, because it'll run forward and grab. So this means Grasp could compound on top of that. Additionally, Grasp will go for the closest survivor in range no matter what, and then it will also do this on, after damage, drag you away. You pretty much have to dodge this, and getting hit by the combo of Grasp into Maul, not that we've drawn Maul yet, is absolutely terrifying. I think Grasp is a pretty scary card because of how it works in the showdown, in the Prologue Showdown, and I kind of don't want to be seeing it, especially because of what it does with Maul, which right here. So Maul, if someone was grabbed last round, they're going to be the target. If there's someone knocked down, they're going to be the target. But interestingly, if neither of those are there, then we're on to a sniff. So Maul is absolutely fine if you're not knocked down and you haven't been grabbed, because it's just going to make the white lion sniff. But if somebody's been hit by Grasp, or somebody's been knocked down for whatever reason, or been grabbed, this card is absolutely just a beating, which is to be expected. It's an advanced card. So it's definitely going in this pile. And so what we can see now is, when we look at the Prologue White Lion, I've found like 3 cards that I'm like, oh, these ones are okay, these are not too bad, and everything else is like pretty scary. And this is a big part of why the Prologue White Lion can be so unpredictable. It has got some like incredibly strong advanced cards. These 3 are just oof. And if you're not used to avoiding being in front of the white lion so it doesn't grab you and run forward, you can get decimated very fast. Now, fortunately, if things go horribly wrong, the prologue fight is the shortest fight in the campaign, and it's the easiest one to set up again, because, you know, the survivors are pretty much in a fixed state. They all have a founding stone, they all have 1 survival, they have dodge, and they have a cloth around their waist. That's it. So that's all pretty predictable. Okay, onto the hit location deck. If we just drag that over here for a moment. I'm just going to talk about, hopefully we have one here, yes, good. I'm just going to talk about these 2 cards. And I'm only going to talk about this. So first of all, Strange Hand, this is always here. I'm going to take a moment to just really praise this card as being the first hit location you encounter. It is such a good choice for a first card. Like the Prologue fight, this Prologue fight is just impeccable in design. It is incredibly well done, but nothing is as skillful as the choice of the first two cards. Claw, brilliant teaching weapon, teaching tool. Strange Hand, incredibly good as well. So first of all, it highlights the weirdness of the white lion. Like, technically all four-legged mammals, these two front limbs are arms because they have shoulder blades, and so these are technically hands in all cases, but we'll often call them paws, and even call, you know, all four limbs on a dog, say, being legs, even though it's not strictly accurate. But this pulls into tension. This really says, hey, that this thing has actual hands. It makes a feature of it, and it's the feature it throws at you the very first time you attack the white lion. And I think that's some very interesting storytelling. Additionally, it teaches you that attacking and failing can have a penalty, that monsters can react, and also that they can perform their basic action. They can attack you from the hit location deck. It also teaches you that you can score critical wounds sometimes and gain a benefit, and that hit locations can become persistent injuries and be removed from the deck, thinning the deck, increasing the odds of hitting the trap, but also possibly giving you things that affect AI cards. Even though this critical wound, this persistent injury, does not affect any of the AI cards in the Prologue fight, it's a really interesting and clever piece of design to have it like this. So, with a Strange Hand, the general consensus is there's two ways to approach this. Either you chuck your Founding Stone, you get the automatic critical wound, you spend the survival, and you fight the rest of the showdown with Fist and Tooth, and you have strength of 1, which is the same as a Founding Stone strength. So basically, you've only lost out on 10% accuracy and your survival. That's the one way to do it. The other way is just to ignore that and like fight normally. Really up to you how you want to play, for sure. The safest thing to always do is to not throw your Founding Stones. We'll get into this in detail, and just fight it normally. You could run up to the monster and punch it from the butt, Fist and Tooth, for the extra deadly chance, and sort of split the difference and go, maybe I'll get the crit on this. Who knows? The other thing to pay attention to are these. So White Lion has a number of reactions where it will full move forward and grab. Because there will almost always be a survivor in the front spaces before the monster at the start of every single survivor's turn in the round, you kind of need to be thinking about moving that survivor to the flank, or even to the butt if they have space, so they don't get run over and grabbed. Because as we sort of talked about before, there's a bunch of AI deck cards that can cause a lot of very scary things to happen to survivors if they've been grabbed or they're knocked down at the start of the White Lion's turn. So that's kind of one of the other rules of this Prologue fight for us to consider. So we want to always be thinking about grab. Now that brings us to the Showdown itself. This is my preferred starting deployment. What this means is in the very first turn the White Lion's going to run forward to here and it's going to grab this target. And then, he should be here. You get it absolutely right. I grab this target, and then he's going to rotate round to the back, because he may well have spent his survival, and he will attack from the back. This survivor will move here, attack on the flank. Another survivor will move here to attack on the flank, and the last survivor will attack in the butt as well. The order of these doesn't have to be completely fixed. I'd probably send this survivor into the butt attack first, because if the White Lion moves forward, it might end up here. Now, from this point, the White Lion then will choose its next target. It doesn't actually have anything in the front facing. Oops. Oh my goodness, wrong button. There we are. So it will turn to face these two, and because I'm the monster controller, I can choose to have it target whichever one of these is the least damaged. And from there onwards, we're now going to be doing a rotation. So assuming he spent his survival and now he has to spend his survival, the goal on this next turn would be, first of all, for this guy to rotate round to the butt. This is a risky attack. We might not do it, depending how we're feeling. If the survivors are quite badly injured, then probably we need to stop doing this attack. But if we're fairly early on and we're feeling spicy, we may make the attack. That's where we could get punished. If the white lion grabs and runs forward, then Urza's just going to get like mauled up and tough luck. But so this is one of the things that's always super interesting about Kingdom Death, is sometimes the right move might be to do nothing at all. It might be to move here and not attack. And then Urza can move to here and attack. And then Alistair and Lucy can attack from the butt. Then the lion would turn closest target. We'd target Urza this time. And then we rotate. So the goal after that would be for Urza to move around to the back, Zachary to move to this flank, and then ideally Lucy would attack and then move to here to be in the front facing as the target, and Alistair could attack from where he is. You might do Alistair first, in fact you probably would in case the white line moves forward. But essentially what we're trying to do is a dance where the survivor that is most likely to be targeted next is the healthiest survivor. So if they've got survival, that we want to be keeping them there for that, fantastic. Otherwise it's whoever's got the least chance of suffering severe injuries and potentially dying. Now, if somebody does die, it's not too bad. Losing one survivor in this starting showdown gives you an early death principle. And you can grab graves, and that gives you a chance of getting +1 luck on a survivor. Or when the gambler's chest, when you're playing with that, it lets you get early to cannibalise, which gives you an increased chance of getting a really good philosophy if the circumstances align right. So it's not a disaster to lose one survivor in the starting showdown. And given that, this is where we get to the branching path. So you have a decision pretty much from the start of this as to whether you're going to use your founding stones or you're going to use fist and tooth. So if I just grab a survivor board and drag it over here, we'll have a look at the difference. Here we are. So cloth, founding stone, fist and tooth. Now the difference between these two starting weapons as our options is the founding stone is 10% more accurate, hitting on a 7+, and has 1 strength. The Prologue White Lion has 6 toughness, so what that means is with the founding stone you will wound the monster on a 5+. 5 + 1 is 6, so that's 60% of the time. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Fantastic. That's really nice and reliable. Fist and Tooth, on the other hand, hits 10% of the time less, so 20%, 30% in the 8, 9, 10, 30%, and 40% in the butt, as opposed to 40%, 50%. And significantly, it has 1 less strength. So you're only wounding half the time with fist and tooth. So this is by no doubt the worse of the two weapons. However, it has deadly, which gives you +1 luck. And the White Lion has almost every single hit location apart from the trap can be critically wounded. So you can choose to not use your founding stones and go entirely fist and tooth for the whole showdown, with the hope of generating a bunch of critical wounds that will give you access to extra resources, meaning you go into Lantern Year 1 with more resources. The thing is, that also means you're more likely for people to die during the showdown, and you're more likely to lose the showdown. So what you're kind of hoping for within this is to beat the odds. If you're okay with starting again, if you enjoy that rush of playing more dangerously, you can lean full fist and tooth. That means you can save all your founding stones, you can take them into the Lantern Year 1 White Lion fight and have a bunch of extra pieces of gear because you generated more resources. It's really sweet. But the longer the fight goes on for, the more likely it is you're going to get wiped out. and you can have turns where every single survivor is doing nothing at all because they're failing to hit, or they're hitting and failing to wound. And the Founding Stone is more reliable. So the opposite end of that is to go pure Founding Stones and use them, and perhaps even throw one or two to close out the fight near the end. The truth of it is, every single round, every single act, you can choose either direction. You can split the difference. If things are going well and the monster's missed a bit, or you haven't taken too much damage, you might choose to fist and tooth with a couple of survivors in the blind spot and use Founding Stones on the rest. If you're getting close to the end, the showdown's gone pretty well, and you are looking to preserve your survivors, you might even throw some of your Founding Stones. It all depends on the situation. It moves around, but you should always be thinking about this difference. Should I be fist and toothing to get extra resources potentially, or should I be using the dependable Founding Stone? So that's the two paths. You're never committed to one. There isn't actually a right answer. Fist and tooth route, higher variance, higher risk, higher rewards. Founding Stone variant, Founding Stone route, more reliable, on average lower rewards because it doesn't crit anywhere near as much, but it wounds more often. Or you can even just sort of like split the difference and have the first survivor to act, throw the Founding Stone against the Strange Hand, spend their survival, fist and tooth the whole time, and everyone else go with the Founding Stone. But yeah, it's really up to you. Ultimately, it can change moment by moment, depending what the White Lion's doing, depending the situation and the durability left on all your survivors. You could be acting a bunch of different ways. So that's kind of it. That's sort of the summary. So to get to the most salient points, think about whether you want to fist and tooth or Founding Stone each turn. Consider whether the monster is low enough in health that you should chuck a Founding Stone or two to close the fight out, especially if it's gone well and you've generated a bunch of extra resources. And try not to attack the White Lion if there are survivors in front. Get them out of the way first, let them make their attacks, and then bring other survivors in. And try and give the White Lion a target that is as durable, as unharmed as possible, and dance around and round it, rotate around and round, and get 2 to 3 attacks in the blind spot every single round. Okay, so there we are, that's it. That is the introduction to the Dark Bestiary and a breakdown on my thoughts on the prologue fight. Again, to just stress, I think that the prologue fight is incredibly well designed. I think it's a really good fight. I don't skip it because every time it is interesting and engaging, and even now we have like the Crimson Crocodile and Frog Dog prologue fights. I'll still enjoy playing the White Lion one occasionally because this is a really well designed, interesting monster that kicks off a fantastic game in a fascinating and engaging manner. Love it. Just love it. So, next time we return to the Dark Bestiary, it's going to be Chapter 1, and it's going to be the White Lion in full. And oh my god, it's taken more than an hour to do all of this. These are not going to be short. It takes me 2 to 3 days just to break the monsters apart and get it all written down on spreadsheets for analysis. This is going to be a lot of work. But that closes our introduction. Pens down, and I will see you next time.